Do you hear, children of the shadow? Do you hear the rumble of the last seals breaking upon the earth? In the hidden corridors of power, where light never dares to penetrate, the silent judgment has begun that will put an end to centuries of deception. Did you think that Peter's throne would last forever? That men clothed in white would be incorruptible? Fools! Today, in the heart of the Vatican, a pontiff is not simply elected. A sentence written before the stars were woven is invoked. The last conclave, the last pope, the last hour. Will you be witnesses, or will you be condemned with them? Come, open your eyes before it's too late. The silence that enveloped the marble walls of the apostolic palace seemed denser than stone itself, as if each block held the compressed echo of unrevealed prayers and confessions. Beneath Michelangelo's frescoes, where golden angels swirled in eternal painted processions, a handful of cardinals advanced with measured steps, their red cassocks brushing the polished floor like sails floating in a sea of gloom. But this march was not a parade of sanctity. It was a procession of conscious conspirators, custodians of secrets so ancient that not even the ink in the Vatican archives dared to name them. In the first hours before the bronze doors close, the air already smelled of incense mixed with fear. From the Borgiano corridor, that hidden passageway that Alexander VI ordered excavated to slip into his forbidden rendezvous, came the notable murmur of voices in archaic Latin, an inverted prayer, intoned backward, as if each word sought to retrace the path of light. That prayer, repeated century after century by a few initiates, did not seek to bless the conclave, but to chain the will of those present, bend the collective conscience, and seal an oath of silence with something more powerful than excommunication, the horror of a punishment that transcended the grave. Because behind the walls, where the human mind could no longer separate itself from the fluttering of painted archangels and demons, beat a mechanical heart, the gears of power, each cog turning precisely thanks to a lubricant of blackmail. The parchment files kept in the secret chamber, sealed by 3 keys that were never found in the same pockets, contained detailed reports on the private life of each cardinal, lovers hidden behind confessionals, bank accounts in unknown paradises, suspicions of political sympathies that oscillated between the far right and the revolution. Those archives, compiled over generations by obscure monsignors who never wore purple, were the invisible rope that strangled the conscience of any prince of the church who dreamed of raising his voice. In the antechamber, the master of ceremonies reviewed the list of the recently deceased, as every voluntary death within the Vatican had to be disguised as a sudden illness. It was not uncommon, in the weeks before the conclave, for a curious canon to wake up floating on the Tiber, or for a silent archivist to accidentally fall from a ladder while dusting off 13th century bulls. The medical report always spoke of sudden heart attacks. The truth, recorded in invisible ink in confiscated diaries, showed a gloved hand administering poison into a wine glass, or an elbow thrusting with deadly precision, all to preserve the apparent purity of a process supposedly inspired by the Holy Spirit. The first door closed with a metallic groan, and the echo filled the Sistine Chapel like the bass note of an underground organ. The sound marked the beginning of the closure. No more words would leave that chamber until the white smoke crowned the Roman sky. But before the cardinals took their seats, an elderly senior cardinal with a brittle voice delivered a litany not found in any known liturgies, a series of verses in late Latin that spoke of Simon Magus and the secret purchase of spiritual gifts. The younger ones frowned, unaware that this litany was the ancient key that opened a parallel assembly, invisible to the eyes of the world. Because while television cameras focused on the outdoor fireplace and the faithful prayed in St. Peter's Square, a second, overlapping conclave was taking place inside, one in which votes were bought with promises about strategic dioceses, control of congregations, and access to the hidden treasures of the Holy See's patrimonial administration. This sacred commerce was conducted in whispers during coffee breaks, where teaspoons clinked like black mass bells, and the watchful eyes of sworn stewards analyzed every smile, every handshake, every slight nod that amounted to a contract signed with the blood of millions of souls. The election of a pope didn't depend solely on qualified majorities. Factions had to be balanced. The protectors of secret archives, jealous of scrolls recounting anti-Christian pacts with pagan kings, God's bankers who moved clandestine capital in foreign stock exchanges, the theologians of Opus Dei, masters of shadowy influence, and the diplomatic old guard who spoke with governments and intelligence services. Each group wrote names on hidden papers, proposed candidates, and erased enemies. There was talk of ghost ballots, votes designated for the recently deceased, used to gauge the pulse of an alliance without revealing its true strength until the opportune moment. Stories were told of cardinals suffering sudden asthma attacks just before the decisive vote, their absence tipping the balance in favor of another. And always in the gloom, the persistent whisper that some invisible hand could stop an elderly heart with a simple touch of a handkerchief soaked in digitalis. In an adjoining room, sheltered by Flemish tapestries depicting Constantine's triumph, a Camaldolese monk guarded a tiny reliquary. It was said that inside lay a fragment of a burnt parchment, attributed to a censored passage from the Gospel of Judas. The piece, illegible to the naked eye, possessed, according to legend, the power to reveal the hidden treachery in the soul of whoever touched it in a lust for power. Some whisper that, before each crucial conclave, one of the candidates was invited to pray before the reliquary. Those who broke out in a cold sweat and flinched were never nominated again. Those who maintained a fixed, unchanging gaze ascended like comets destined to burn up in the papal firmament. It wasn't just ancient relics that were used to manipulate consciences. In a deep basement beneath the Sala Regia, where the lamps barely conquered the darkness, the Brotherhood of the Black Quill met, a circle of erudite scribes who mastered perfect forgery. Their hands copied papal bulls with such precision that even the most rigorous graphic experts couldn't detect any differences. These scribes produced apocryphal letters, attributed to pontiffs dead for centuries, missives addressed to non-existent kingdoms, but whose sealed seals served as a moral passport for blackmailing prelates. Showing an authentic letter in which a medieval pope instructed the creation of a secret treasure was enough to convince a modern cardinal that there were inheritances to protect under his future pontificate, as long as he signed decrees convenient to those who wielded the pen. As the days of the conclave accumulated like layers of dust on a crucifix, tension tainted the air with a metallic taste. Official votes followed one another, with the cadence of tired heartbeats, but in the side aisles, invisible knife fights rage. Stories were woven about an African cardinal who received a black rose soaked in myrrh on his desk, a sure sign that his guerrilla past had not been forgotten. Or about an American cardinal who was slipped a blurry photograph of an unacknowledged grandson, the fruit of a youthful fling before entering the seminary. Some threats came true. An accident in the shower, a sudden embolism during the night. When the medical team certified the cause as natural, the veterans nodded in grim understanding. The Holy Spirit had shown his preference by eliminating those who should not reign. But the longest shadow came not from the Vatican walls, but from beyond the Tiber River, in discreet palaces in Trastevere and stately villas in the Castelli Romani. Emissaries of foreign powers met with Vatican lobbyists. Some represented geopolitical interests, governments eager for a pope favorable to energy deals, military treaties, and convenient silences on human rights violations. Others served anonymous magnates who guarded artistic heritage stolen during wars and craved the Vatican's implicit blessing to whitewash looted relics. In those luxurious rooms, between glasses of Amarone and succulent Carpaccio, pacts were signed on linen napkins. If this cardinal ascended to the chair of Peter, that nation would obtain a pious silence on a certain forgotten genocide. If another was elected, the papal discourse would be adjusted to open markets to speculative banks. Halfway through the third day, when the vote stalled between two candidates and the morning's burned ballots billowed gray smoke, Old protocol allowed for a brief break in the pineapple garden. There, amid manicured bushes and babbling fountains, the cardinals' smiling faces hid the anxiety of staking their future on a 15-minute conversation. It was there that the shrewd-eyed Argentine cardinal made an almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. That sign, neither a greeting nor a blessing, was enough for a German colleague to understand the promise. Mutual support to eliminate the Italian favorite's candidacy in exchange for control of the Secretariat of the Economy. In the distance, a Polish prelate pretended to read the Psalms while recording the scene with a micro-camera hidden in his pectoral cross. The following night, as the empty corridors echoed with the creak of clandestine footsteps, 8 cardinals gathered in the hidden library of maps, where the portolan charts confiscated from heretical navigators are kept. On a black marble table, they lit 7 candelabras. The 8th place was occupied by a simple bronze bowl, from which emanated a bluish smoke scented with laudanum. There, under the flickering of the flames, they swore on the liber juratus of Honorius. They promised to unite their vows in the next round, sealed the pact with a drop of blood placed in the bowl, and recited the forbidden name that, according to legend, compelled the will of the indifferent. When the last candle went out, they knew they had unleashed something more than a political alliance. They had summoned history itself to tip the scales. At dawn, the penultimate ballot yielded an unexpected result. A Filipino cardinal, until then considered an outsider, emerged with a surprising number of votes. No one spoke, but their pale faces betrayed their surprise. However, this sudden rise wasn't intended to crown him. It was pure strategy to fracture the conservative bloc. Seeing themselves threatened by a third contender, the undecided cardinals yielded to the pressure and shifted their support to the Argentine, just as the circle had planned the night before. The smoke rose again, first gray, then white. The bells rang jubilantly, and the crowd in the square erupted in applause, unaware that the white purity came from an interior blackened by unspeakable plots. When the new pontiff appeared on the balcony and recited the Bona Sera, the lights from the cameras illuminated a friendly, almost humble face. But beneath the white cassock, hidden between the waist and the plexus, was sewn a small reliquary containing that portion of charred parchment attributed to Judas. Some witnesses would swear they saw a dark glint in his eyes when he mentioned the word mercy, as if he knew that power. True power, the power that guides the history of peoples, needed neither swords nor armies, but secrets. And the most potent secrets are those that are never spoken, those that remain suspended in the shadows, feeding on fears and devotions. That same night, the losing cardinals quietly packed up, but not all left Rome. Some were led to apartments within the Leonine walls, under the pretext of convalescence, to reflect in prayer. There, personal doctors, loyal to the new pontiff, prescribed tonics that calmed the pulse and soothed the tongue. Others received diplomatic missions to remote countries, where the icy winter and solitude would act as a golden exile. Nothing was more effective than banishing the enemy with courtesy, for courtesy poisons better than arsenic. Meanwhile, at the Casa Santa Marta, the newly elected pope removed his skullcap, placed it on his desk, and along with the master of hidden wounds, an elderly layman who never appears in the public annals, examined a dossier marked with the seal of the black pen. Page after page, names and figures showed the debt of gratitude he owed to those who had championed him. He signed 3 decrees transferring powers over the Vatican Bank, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and the Dicastery of Communications to the hands of his benefactors. With each signature, the scroll of Judas seemed to darken, as if absorbing the ink and condensing the eternal betrayal of the human being who aspires to redeem the world while selling his soul in installments. The crowd outside continued to sing psalms, oblivious to the secret architecture that supported the new throne of Street Peter. But the night was marked by a thunder without lightning, a crash that shook the foundations of the apostolic palace, as if all of Rome were remembering that, beneath the holy flagstones, ancient blood flows. And in that blood, mixed with the dust of martyrs and the tears of believers, winds a dark thread that is never cut. The thread of power, woven from the fiber of the secrets that men call sacred to justify their own ambition. The main bell rang midnight as the Pope knelt in prayer before the wooden crucifix of St. Ignatius. He whispered words that no one heard, not even God, because they were not addressed to heaven. In the catacombs, an almost imperceptible echo responded, as if the rock itself were repeating the name that had been spoken in the library of maps. And that name, echoing through the empty corridors, promised that the coming conclave would begin not with prayers, but with a silent judgment of all the souls who had bought a vote with the currency of fear. The lights went out one by one in the Vatican, and the Tiber continued its shadowy course under the all-seeing moon. But on the Ponte Sant'Angelo, a muffled figure dropped a small glass vial containing gray ash into the water. As it touched the current, the ash dispersed like the dust of burnt wings. And somewhere, perhaps in a monastic cell or a ministerial palace, a sleepless old cardinal felt a chill. He knew the game was not over. For the dark secrets of the conclave never die. They only change custodians, waiting for the next fumata, the next ambitious soul willing to sacrifice the light to embrace the purple. And so, beneath the vault of a Roman sky that exhaled purple gleams upon the dome of St. Peter's, the invisible machinery of power continued to turn silently, carving its geometry of unspeakable fears and gratitude. At dawn, as pilgrims thronged to receive the new pontiff's first Urbi et Orbi blessing, the shadows dancing between Bernini's columns seemed like ethereal knives sharpening promises. Each step of the Swiss guards on the pavement of the square drew a runic code, a martial ritual intended, more than to protect, to warn the curious that, among those marbles, sanctity was the varnish on a board where endless games were played. Inside the Domus Sanctae Marthae, the pontiff didn't sleep. He reread the dossier his benefactors had left him until dawn, and felt the slow combustion of an inner fire in his chest. He remembered the warning of the ancient master of the hidden wounds. Here, your holiness, the truth is the rebel's shroud. Dress it with secrecy, or it will dress you with leprosy. These weren't empty words. A shaky signature was enough to remove the prefect of the congregation for the clergy and replace him with an ally of the Nocturnal Alliance. A second stroke of the pen was enough to allow the Secretariat of State to reabsorb certain classified reports on abuses, documents that, conveniently, would never see the light of day. And a third, almost condescending stroke restructured the Swiss Guard under the noble pretext of modernizing security, but in reality to embed men whose loyalty belonged to the invisible architects of the conclave. That morning, as the bells rang out to celebrate the consecration of the new Vicar of Christ, a small dark drone rose up in the Vatican gardens, like a metallic horsefly. Its propellers buzzed with the inert devotion of a killer insect, and from a height never monitored by anti-aircraft systems, it transmitted encrypted images to a basement on Via del Fornaci. There, a Hungarian analyst reviewed gestures, smiles, and the exact position of each dignitary. A facial recognition algorithm identified reactions, micro-grimaces, tiny gestures of approval or suspicion. The Holy Spirit now relied on big data analytics. Descending the Scala Regia, the sandals of an Africanist monk stopped in front of a gate whose lock never showed a key, for it was opened by the pulse of blood of those who knew the inverted Psalm of David. Inside awaited a bone reliquary, carved with Coptic letters and sealed with tomb wax. The monk intoned the psalm backward. The door yields only to the word that undoes the light. He placed in the reliquary a confiteor handwritten in obsidian dust ink. It was the petition for a pardon from a bishop whose crime was not doctrinal heresy, but rather the need to know who had paid for the poison that killed a reforming cardinal in the previous conclave. That costly absolution would be currency for future blackmail, but the monk wasn't thinking about money. He was thinking about the geometry of divine punishment, a perfect figure where each line of guilt folded until it closed around the victim. Meanwhile, in Castel Gandolfo, the Pope Emeritus, an old man with translucent skin, prayed before a broken ivory Christ. He knew that the power he had abandoned does not die. It stagnates like black water behind walls. He left a sealed letter on the table with precise instructions. If his death came suddenly, reveal to the world the names of those who had tamed the spirit. That letter never reached its recipient. 48 hours later, a friar from the Mater Ecclesiae monastery found him in the chapel, peacefully asleep, forever. The medical report spoke of cardiac arrest. The secret history told of a consecrated host dipped in belladonna. And, in the shadows, the black pen recorded another secret for the archives. The voice of a dead pope who could no longer displease his successor. The circle closed, but each closure gave rise to new leaks. For the Vatican, like a clock with demonic gears, knows only two pauses: eternity and oblivion, and neither is within reach of a mortal wearing a pastoral ring. The following days brought protocolary visits. Presidents, kings, and dictators disguised as Democrats paraded through the Clementine Hall. Every handshake was photographed, every smile measured in pixels. On the side table, a luggage rack discreetly placed chests with national coats of arms. Inside, symbolic offerings. Solid gold crosses, ancient statuettes, priceless codices. But beneath the velvet were sealed envelopes containing energy agreements, money laundering routes, or promises of diplomatic silence about distant massacres. The new pontiff signed mental reminders of each favor. The countdown to payment would begin as soon as the last caravan left the Leonine walls. But the eternal city never sleeps when the Vatican conspires. In a cafe in Campo de Fiori, a young journalist from L'Osservatore Romano, a descendant of a typographer who printed clandestine pamphlets against Pius VII, handed a French correspondent a manila envelope. Inside, an encrypted flash drive. Inside the flash drive, the footage of that meeting in the pineapple garden. The faces were clear. The voices, amplified by an artificial intelligence filter, revealed the pact. The correspondent, a fervent Catholic, hesitated. Publishing that material would set the world on fire. He withheld the exclusive, seeking confirmation. That hesitation doomed him. On the third day, a motorcycle ran him over on the Vittorio Emanuele Bridge. The journalist never returned to her apartment. She was found months later in a cloistered convent, wearing a white habit, her gaze blank. Perpetual vows were her salvation or her damnation. Who could say? With each foreign power demanding dividends, the pontiff felt the weight of the scroll of Judas. The consistories began. A new dicastery for digital charity was created, its budget exceeding that of any African diocese. Cardinals were appointed in forgotten seas in Oceania, inflating the quota of addicted votes. And in the banking engine room of the Holy See, where Bloomberg terminals flicker like profane candles, cross transfers blurred the trail of millions of euros. Children's hospitals closed while Renaissance palaces were restored with new frescoes and laser alarms. It was then that a chilly wind swept through St. Peter's Basilica. The keeper of the Fisherman's Ring, a stony-faced Calabrian prelate, found an unsealed scarlet envelope on the side altar. Inside, a single Latin phrase, Caveant concilium in tenebris, beware of counsel in darkness, and a tuft of white wool, threads from a Trappist habit. The pontiff knew someone within the walls had decided to betray the traitor. The balance was as fragile as Murano glass. The reaction was devastating. A midnight mass was called ad orientem, a liturgical pretext for gathering the curia in the Pauline chapel, while the singers intoned a responsory of Tenebrae. The Vatican gendarmerie closed exits, seized telephones, and inspected rooms. The switched-off cameras of the internal circuit recorded the 3-hour interrogation of an Australian archbishop accused of leaking documents about a network of real estate investments in London. He emerged hesitantly, his cassock stained with sweat, his fate uncertain. That night, the Swiss Guard sealed the correspondence cabinets with wax. The air was filled with the smell of melted tallow and ancient fear. But not even severity stops the ghosts of secrecy. In the tomb of St. Peter, beneath papal confession, where 1,000 eternal lamps watch over the bones of the martyrs, an Armenian canonicon discovered a moved slab. Inside, a lead-bound manuscript dating from the 4th century, an apocryphal copy of the Epistola Clementis Occulta. The text spoke of a pact between Roman bishops and senators to elect bishops according to the bloodline of patrician families who worshiped dead gods. It revealed that the Petrine election was never celestial, but aristocratic. The Canonicon took the relic to the Secretariat of State. The next day it was transferred to Gemelli Hospital with an exploding aneurysm. The manuscript disappeared. Only a note remained in the archives. Heretic material incinerated due to pastoral risk. Meanwhile, in the cellars of the Black Feather, a chronicler was adding a new name to the list of the silenced. Every line of that book seemed written with volcanic charcoal and the tears of orphans. No one knew who would keep the record if the feather fell, but everyone sensed that history would find another hand. History always finds scribes for its passionate writing. With the second year of his pontificate, the storm broke. A media storm called Vataliix II uncovered emails that spoke of orgies paid for with charitable funds, of invoices for silk clothing from a Florentine tailor who had never seen the silk. The ecclesiastical elites dug in. Official spokesmen blamed anti-Christian forces. The pontiff, with a contrite expression, spoke of individual, not systemic, corruption. But privately, the Nocturnal Alliance demanded results. An enemy had to fall to appease the masses. And he fell. The German cardinal, the one with the sign in the pineapple garden, was presented as a scapegoat. He resigned in tears, retreated to a Benedictine monastery in the Alps, where the snow silences scandals. But he left a USB flash drive, hidden in cell 33, sealed with the password Judas. On it, recordings, balance sheets, names. On the longest night of winter, while Rome slept in the drizzle, the pontiff went to the Sistine Sacristy. There, wrapped only in the flickering light of a chandelier, he contemplated the frescoes. He looked at the fearsome Christ, the judge at the Last Judgment, and wondered, who will judge the one who holds the key? He reached out toward the painting as if seeking an answer, but all he received was the icy touch of the air. Then he understood that the keys of the kingdom do not open the door of rest. They only turn perpetually, one closing the revelation of the secret, the other opening the abyss of necessary sin. At dawn, he returned to his desk and wrote a letter by hand. It wasn't an encyclical or an exhortation. It was an oath of renunciation, whenever the church asks for it. He sealed the envelope and put it in the bottom drawer. He knew that this piece of paper was his life insurance and his sentence. If the beast demanded his blood, he would offer his staff. But the beast is not satisfied with resignations. It is satisfied with obedience. In Asia, an ascetic cardinal founded a radical reform movement. Ecclesia Povera. He drew crowds and denounced corruption. The Vatican invited him to Rome, received him with honors, and appointed him prefect of a new dicastery for global transparency. 3 months later, the cardinal was found dead in his Vatican apartment, a heart attack. Rumor mongers spoke of contaminated tea, the medical certificate, natural causes. The movement dissolved.
Dear time travelers and lovers of eternal stories, I am Messalina, and I have a little secret for you. The gods reward those who support their favorite storytellers. If this corner of myths, legends, and mysteries has sparked your curiosity, I invite you to follow my channel and activate the bell so you don't miss a single trip through time. And if you want this legacy to grow and continue exploring together the greatness of Rome and beyond, you can leave your offering on PayPal or Patreon. The links are in the description, because even the gods know that any help allows for the forging of eternal works. I promise you that if you do, the gods will bring you peace, prosperity, and perhaps a little touch of fate. Your gestures do not go unnoticed, and my gratitude will be as infinite as time itself.
But seeds germinate where least expected. A Congolese deacon, a witness to that wake, flood with a notebook full of notes and a sealed cell phone chip. He contacted Brazilian hackers, uploading conversations in Latin and modern Aramaic to the dark web, fragments of rituals invoking Simon Magus to persuade wills. The underground network shook. In anonymous forums, renegade theologians spoke of the Church of the Black Smoke, a parallel society that would manipulate every conclave since the Middle Ages. Secularist blogs, tabloids, conspiracy podcasts, all fed on that wealth of supposedly stolen documents. The Vatican denied it, the faithful doubted, the enemies smiled. The pontiff, surrounded by advisors, approved an apostolic constitution on transparency in papal elections. He promised that the upcoming conclave would be televised live up to the moment of the first smoke. Off camera, the cardinals complained, "Will you expose our prayers to drones?" He replied mildly, "Prayer does not fear the light." But everyone knew that the light can blind you just before someone stabs you. Every morning, as they kissed the ring, the foreign delegations failed to see the pressure that golden circle exerted on the pontiff's flesh. No one noticed that beneath his cassock, the reliquary of Judas grew hot as the lie grew. It began to burn his skin. A doctor found a blister in the shape of an inverted cross and ordered ointments to be prepared. The pontiff understood the metaphor. The traitor burns where he carries betrayal. But he couldn't part with the reliquary. He had sewn it himself, with thread from a martyr's hair, to remind us that every kingdom of light needs a piece of night within. Another year passed, and the Amazon Synod arrived. Amidst indigenous songs and discourses on planetary theology, a wooden figure called Pachamama sparked outrage in traditionalist circles. One night, two young men threw the statuettes into the Tiber in defense of doctrinal purity. The pontiff then knew that the enemy within was using faith as a double-edged sword. He himself had once wielded similar weapons. "If heresy doesn't exist, invent it," muttered a Dominican advisor who had read Machiavelli. And the pontiff did just that. He convened a consistory on idolatry, excommunicated the sacrilegious, raised the rehabilitated Pachamama, and spoke of the value of cultural incarnation. With a gesture, he turned desecration into a victory for his narrative. The beast devours even opposition to multiply its tentacles. Even so, the old ghosts of the conclave do not rest. In the tunnels that run from San Pietro in Giancoli to San Giovanni dei Fiorentini, passages built for the Medici to avoid conspiracies. An anonymous hand painted a graffiti, "Ubi fumus, ibi diabolus." Where there is smoke, there is the devil. The Vatican sent workers to erase it, but the next day it reappeared, this time on the facade of the Jesuit General Curia. The message spread like a plague of letters. Some tourists photographed it, ignoring the Latin. Others savored the irony, reposting with vintage filters under the hashtag Fumetanera. The devil gained likes. The tension eventually fractured the alliance that had given birth to the pontiff. The Brotherhood of the Black Feather demanded payment of old debts and threatened to release to the press the apocryphal letters that had been used to blackmail opponents. The Society of Jesus responded by leaking Vatican bank figures. Opus Dei, for its part, leaked to the Wall Street Journal the pontiff's plans to sell Fifth Avenue properties and plug financial holes. Hostilities burned like embers under the ashes. In this jumble of cross betrayals, the pontiff made the only logical decision: to call an extraordinary consistory to reform the papal election process. He coined a seemingly foolish proposal, allowing consultative voting to lay delegates, men and women selected from each continent. The announcement was a theological earthquake. In Il Osservatore Romano, an editorial spoke of a Copernican revolution. In the corridors, there was talk of institutional suicide. The pontiff smiled. One beast attacks the other. I only hold the mirror. On the day of the presentation, an octogenarian cardinal suffered a stroke at the ambo just after reading the last line of the decree. He died without confession. Some saw divine justice. Others saw the signature of an old poison, ethylene. The consistory ended in chaos. The press smelled blood. The pontiff was taken to his chambers escorted by the Swiss guard. The reliquary was burning. His skin was oozing. In the papal infirmary, a Swiss doctor suggested removing it. The pontiff shook his head and asked for solitude. That night, he wrote an encyclical letter that has never been published. It began, "The smoke of sacrifice rises as a witness to the blood that never ceases to cry out." At dawn, Rome shook with a 3.3 magnitude earthquake. Mild, but enough to crack ancient sculptures. Peter's Basilica, however, remained firm. Theologians debated whether it was a sign. The square filled with pilgrims. Cranes inspected the damage. Doves took flight. And on the balcony of blessings, the red curtain fluttered empty. The pontiff did not appear. Hours passed. Rumors, sick, captive, on the run. Finally, the Chamber of Prelates issued a statement. The Holy Father was taking a retreat for silent prayer. But secrets don't applaud withdrawals. That same afternoon, the Apostolic Archive suffered a digital intrusion. Someone downloaded 400 gigabytes of documents indexed under Conclave_Arcana. 2 hours later, the files began leaking onto anonymous servers. Pages and pages of blackmail, pacts, black masses, multi-million-dollar transactions. And then, Street Peter's Square became a blaze of screens. The faithful read scarlet headlines. The infernal secrets of the conclave. Some wept, others laughed bitterly. An elderly Monsignor collapsed upon seeing his name associated with accounts in Liechtenstein. The world burned with indignation at the sudden transparency. At dusk, as collective anger raged, the chimney of the Sistine Chapel began to smoke again. No one understood. No conclave had been convened. And yet the column of smoke rose, black, dense, impossible. The stench was of wax and charred flesh. Some said it smelled of sulfur. The world held its breath. Inside, on the marble floor, lay the body of the pontiff, consumed by flames that left no trace of fuel. Only the reliquary of Judas remained, intact, glowing with an unnatural brilliance. Inside, the parchment had completely blackened, as if it had fulfilled the prophecy inscribed in fire. He who bears my letters will perish in the flame that conscience does not extinguish. The gendarmerie sealed the scene. Firefighters found no source of the fire. The College of Cardinals held an emergency meeting. It had to decide whether the death was an accident, suicide, or martyrdom. The world demanded answers. And yet, the cardinals knew the age-old truth. The fire wasn't a punishment, it was a warning. They burned the guardian to free the secret. Now, without a pontiff, and with the leaked archives, the next conclave would be held under the spotlight of a skeptical and bloodthirsty world. But the beast of secrecy doesn't die when it's published. It sheds its skin. In a Parisian attic, a lay exorcist was reviewing the Judas flash drive. He smiled at the magnitude of the chaos. In Buenos Aires, a young priest was writing a sermon on betrayal. In Kinshasa, the Congolese deacon was planning to found an independent church. In Rome, the apostolic walls breathed the dust of destruction and exhaled the certainty that, after every smoke, there will come another smoke. After every revelation, another conspiracy. After every pope, another man ready to carry the reliquary, to seal with martyr's thread those dark secrets that make the world go round. Because as long as there is a key, there will be a door. As long as there is a faith, there will be a shadow. And as long as a conclave brings together human hearts, the greatest secret will continue to beat, waiting for the moment to burn again. to remind humanity that absolute power does not reside in the light, but in the darkness where light fears to venture. And in that darkness, nourished by the blood of martyrs, the fear of prelates, the shattered hope of the faithful, the next smoke already rises, still invisible, but inevitable like dawn, ready to tinge the Roman sky with a new omen. Because after all, in the Vatican, nothing ends. Everything is recycled in the eternal fire of secrets, and each secret is a spark awaiting the next smoke. The night before the lockdown began with a distant rumble of thunder on the Via della Conciliazione, as if heaven itself wanted to warn Rome that even without a reigning pope, power throbbed beneath the flagstones with the persistence of an arrhythmic heart. The pope's body still lay in the temporary crypt, a cypress coffin escorted by Swiss guards brandishing polished halberds, a hollow symbol of an authority that no longer belonged to anyone. And yet the swarm of cardinals moved with the nervous haste of those who know that the crown of thorns still emanates a poisonous sap. Barely 8 days had passed since the funeral. The media spotlight continued to focus on every crack in the papal marble, and the news networks speculated in 24 languages about the identity of the successor. But inside the Paolo VI classroom, a deeper murmur ran through the carpeted halls. This time, white smoke wouldn't be enough to calm the world. The networks, the bots, the markets, and even the collective subconscious, fueled by 1,000 conspiracy theories, would also have to be tamed. The master of ceremonies, a stony-faced Slovenian Monsignor, reviewed an expanded protocol that included 5G signal inhibitors, retinal trackers for each cardinal, and a new sworn clause. I renounce, under penalty of excommunication, leta sententia, any connected neural device that transmits electrosynaptic impulses outside this precinct. The more tech-savvy cardinals frowned. It was no longer enough to confiscate phones. Cochlear implants, smart pacemakers, and magnifying glasses with microcameras had to be confessed. The Holy Spirit, some thought with bitter irony, would soon demand cyber audits before descending upon the Sistine Chapel. Meanwhile, at the Secretariat of State, a team of diplomatic analysts reviewed geopolitical risk matrices. The frozen war in Eastern Europe had entered a phase of secret negotiations, and several powers saw the Holy See as a valuable mediator, as long as the new pope didn't align himself with the opposing bloc. Across the Atlantic, financial lobbies were pressing for the future pontiff to keep his bridges with Wall Street intact, where the Vatican's ethical banking system was quietly holding debt derivatives that, if blown, would sweep away entire hospitals and missions. And in Beijing, those responsible for the provisional agreement on the appointment of bishops were waiting for a successor willing to quietly cede another shred of pastoral authority in mainland China. That hive of interests converged on an invisible point: votes, or, rather, the price of each vote. At 7 o'clock in the morning on the appointed day, the cardinals entered the Sistine Chapel in procession. The official camera captured only the first bars of Veni Creator. Then, the gigantic bronze doors closed with a dull thud that reverberated like a stone sentence. No one, except the invisible guardians of the Black Pen, knew that 45 minutes earlier, a clandestine liturgy had been held in the crypt of the pious popes, where 8 cardinals from 3 continents recited a modified psalm. Erege nobis regem, non secundum cor tuum, sed secundum necessitates nostris. Raise up for us a king not according to your heart, but according to our needs. Above the temporary altar, a world map pinned with gold pins marked strategic dioceses, and beside it, a leather briefcase contained drafts of concordats, energy contracts, and lists of appointments awaiting the signature of a pontiff who did not yet exist. In the square, the crowd sniffed the wind, waiting for signs. A prediction algorithm installed by RAI displayed real-time odds based on search volume and social media sentiment. Nigerian Cardinal Maduka was leading with 32%, closely followed by Argentina's Mendoza and the Philippines' Villanueva. But London bookmakers told a different story. They had the Italian Bellori, a gray theologian, almost unknown, but with powerful friends at the IOR as the silent favorite. The divergence was symptomatic of a crucial fact. The royal conclave was being played out on tables and in basements where cameras couldn't reach. The first vote was a trial and error. Obvious names appeared on the counting table, names agreed upon, and, to the surprise of some, a handful of ballots bearing the inscription Petrus Romanus, an allusion to the final figure in St. Malachi's prophecy. The dean read that name and smiled with the pallor of someone who remembers that jokes, in Latin, can be disguised acts of faith. When the ballots were burned, black smoke rose. Outside, it was drizzling, and a lightning bolt crossed the sky just behind the dome, a perfect image for the news. But inside, the air thickened with the smell of melted wax and paranoid anticipation. During the interval, the cardinals retired to the improvised refectory. There, beneath a Baroque chandelier, the German Ruckert slipped a manila envelope to the Cameroonian Onyonga. Inside, a report on trafficking networks uncovered in his diocese. No one spoke, but the transaction amounted to a squeeze of the throat. At the opposite table, the Chilean Valdez whispered to the Canadian Olderi that the joint investment in lithium mines could be consolidated if an open-minded pope authorized the new green encyclical. And in the corridor, a laywoman, officially the conclave's nutritionist, unofficially the MI6 liaison, listened to conversations in closed Spanish. They were talking about an agreement to hand over the prefecture for economic affairs in exchange for southern votes. The Holy Spirit, the spy thought, has as many dialects as it has a budget. The second ballot brought the first dramatic turn. Bellori, the almost unknown Italian, jumped from 12 to 48 votes. The Nigerian held strong with 53. The Argentine fell to 31. The Filipino plummeted. The smoke remained black, but the tension reached boiling point. The Latin American bloc broke. Some took refuge in the sacristy, praying for real. Others negotiated loudly in the hallway, under the false excuse of looking for coffee. Then the word that no one wanted to say emerged: Black Pope. It wasn't the usual reference to the general of the Jesuits, but the prophetic epithet that the digital world had immortalized for the pontiff destined to mark the end of times. The African cardinal smiled. If that's what they wanted to call them, let the earth tremble. But not everyone shared that enthusiasm. The European old guard saw in an African pope the definitive loss of the historical axis of Christianity. It wasn't explicit racism, but something older. The fear of losing the narrative that sustained the status quo of museums, banks, and blessed aristocratic genealogies. Between the second and third ballots, the accident occurred. Cardinal Villanueva, still a remote hope, slipped in the Sistine Chapel baths and hit his temple on the marble. Medical officials determined he had a minor contusion, but it was enough to isolate him in the infirmary. One less vote for any Asian coalition. Cynics were quick to whisper. The marble was oiled. No one would check. The Holy Spirit rarely leaves fingerprints. The third round lit a firestorm. Bellori climbed to 65 votes. He only needed 10 more. A rumor spread that the previous evening he had used a relic of Pius IX to swear allegiance to the traditional church. But the truth was less romantic. His team, led by a Lombard layman and financial expert, had promised to cancel half of the unpaid debt owed by several African dioceses in exchange for his immediate support. The Nigerian Maduka felt betrayed. He glared at the Italian and retreated to pray before the statue of Judith beheading Holofernes. It was not a subtle metaphor. When Maduka returned, he held his ebony cane close to the Brazilian Cardinal Rocha, the symbol of his voting bloc, and whispered a piece of information. Bellori's order to the IOR included closing 3 hospitals in favelas to redirect funds to the purchase of a palace in London. Roca, who had seen his sister die of malaria, felt his bile rise. He changed his ballot before depositing it in the ballot box. Thus began the stampede. 50 Italian votes met with a sudden wall of global rejection. Result: Bellori 60, Meduca 72. Black smoke again, but the landscape had changed. That afternoon, as the crowd retreated under colorful umbrellas, the Vatican servers suffered a DDoS attack from an unknown source. All the webcams focused on the chimney froze. People, in a sensory panic, thought they saw billowing smoke that didn't exist, bomb threats that no one had planted. CNN reported that military drones were hovering over the city. False, but enough to obscure transparency. In this digital chaos, an anonymous message appeared on X, formerly Twitter. The next pope has already been elected, and he's not human. Shares in brain chip technology companies plummeted. Wall Street stemmed the bleeding only when the account was suspended. But the paranoia archived that tweet. Conspiracy demands archivists. The 4th vote was organized in the dim light of a broadcast-free afternoon. The cardinals entered with bated breath. Their eyes reflected the fear of having lost control of the global narrative. It was then that Cardinal Mendoza, that Argentine with a pastoral smile and a reputation for moderation, made a subtle gesture. He raised 2 interlaced fingers, the internal symbol of the Fraternity of the Silent Blood, a society born during the military juntas, dedicated to protecting church archives from misappropriation or disclosure. Only 9 cardinals understood it, but it was enough to light a fuse. The fraternity possessed compromising videos of Bellori receiving envelopes from the CEO of a powerful hedge fund. Within minutes, the images were projected onto a tablet that was discreetly passed from hand to hand, like a copper snake in the desert. The Italian collapsed. Vows that seemed carved in marble turned to smoke before they burned up. Meduca rose to 84, yet the spirit didn't sign. 6 were missing. Here, dark diplomacy intervened. Omianga, a Cameroonian, turned his gaze to the scattered Asian bloc. He spoke of the martyrdom shed in Nigeria by extremist groups, of the need for a pope who embodied that cross in the 21st century. He suggested that a global curia under an African would finally rebalance the colonial concert of faith. The Asians hesitated. In their countries, persecution was also real. Would it be wise to cede the throne to another starving hemisphere while they bled? Then the element of surprise appeared. China leaked, through a clandestine bishop, a promise to reopen 100 illegal churches if the elected pope did not come from the United States or Europe. It was their way of vetoing, without naming him, Cardinal Burke, standard-bearer of tradition, and an unlikely but toxic candidate. This pushed some Asians toward Meduca. Others turned to Mendoza to balance the pressure. The smoke rose again. The night before the 5th vote, the halls of Santa Marta were filled with the scent of ozone. An unknown drone flew over the roof and launched an electromagnetic pulse that shut down cameras and electronic locks for 30 seconds. Its true purpose was never known, but in those 30 seconds, someone slipped a metal reliquary bearing the inscription Simon Magus under the door of Meduca's room. Inside, a 1st century Roman coin bearing the effigy of Nero and a note in Latin. Every empire that begins with fire ends with fire. Threat, warning, or theological challenge, it doesn't matter. The African cardinal took it firmly, kissed it, and put it in his inside pocket. Nero feared Christians, he told himself, but we are the ones who write history. The 5th round of voting began with a marble silence. The ballots were placed like petals on a tomb. When the vote was counted, the dean paled. Meduca, 92. Mendoza, 17. Bellori, 5. Dispersed, 2. The dean uttered the ritual words, but the echo sounded like a cosmic verdict. Habemus Pipam. White smoke burst from the chimney, which had been shut down minutes earlier by the cyber attack, and this time the cameras were working. The world saw a milky jet ascend into the gray sky, and within seconds, the hashtag African Pope was trending worldwide. However, the plot was not over. While millions awaited the name on the balcony, in the Hall of Tears, the new pontiff, who would take the name Sixtus VI, received not only the white cassock, but 5 folders sealed with colored ribbons: red for financial scandals, black for deviant liturgies, blue for secret diplomacy, green for real estate, and finally, a colorless folder, just one word: Malachi. Inside, a single sheet of typewritten typography. You are Petrus Romanus. Rule with the sword of the Spirit, or with that of Caesar. Time is short. Meduca, now Sixtus, closed his eyes. He remembered the fires in his village, heard the screams of children as churches burned. He had promised to be a shepherd. Now he held the spear. He stepped out onto the balcony. The crowd roared when they saw dark skin under the dull sun. His first sentence was in Latin, but the second, in gravelly English, echoed beyond the walls. The kingdom of God extends where injustice burns, and I come from the fire. Applause, tears, hysteria. In an office at the Quirinal Palace, the Italian president smiled cautiously. In Moscow, a 4-star general muttered, "Interesting." In Washington, a security advisor typed furiously, "Priority 1. Assess African influence in Nigerian oil policy." In Lagos, makeshift bells rang out over Pentecostal services and mosques in a sacred cacophony. But beneath the surface, the machinery creaked. The Brotherhood of the Black Feather demanded an urgent audience. The Jesuits fell silent. Opus Dei calculated losses and gains. The Chinese diplomat smiled. A black pope was neither European nor American. MI6 heard crossed lines. One prelate whispered, "Vendetta." Another, "Miracle." The beast rearranged itself. And Sixtus VI, amid the echo of cheers, felt Nero's reliquary burn like a cold ember. The prophecy didn't end with his election. It was just beginning. That afternoon, the gendarmerie discovered Cardinal Bellori unconscious in his cell, holding an empty bottle of sleeping pills. The medical report spoke of attempted suicide. Others spoke of a negotiated silence. At dusk, the Pope signed his first decree, creating a shadow tribunal to judge ad intra financial crimes. No one knew what it meant, but the title sowed fear. Market monitors wavered. Multinationals that funded Catholic NGOs called for consultations. A second decree canceled the purchase of the London Palace. A third ordered an external audit led by African and Asian economists. A chorus of amen erupted across the global periphery, and a murmur of horror in the Renaissance palaces. At midnight, Sixtus VI descended alone into the crypt of St. Peter's. He knelt before the tomb of the first pope, rested his forehead on the stone, and murmured in Igbo, "Give me the strength to build a kingdom that will not be sold." As he sat up, he saw a shadow. It was the master of ceremonies, handing him an envelope sealed with black wax. Inside, a microchip and a note. Insert into the reliquary. The Pope understood. It was the digital key to the top secret files that governed every blackmail scheme. Without hesitation, he opened the reliquary of Simon Magus, placed the chip next to Nero's coin, and closed it. He felt an icy pang in his chest. Perhaps it was the price of governing. Perhaps confirmation that he had become the guardian of a labyrinth whose walls were made of guilt. When, hours later, the first blue light of dawn touched the dome, the Vatican looked like an exhausted giant. But the beast slept with one eye open, and now it had an African shepherd ready to wield his staff like a rod of iron. The white smoke slowly dissipated, but its scent of chemicals and fear lingered on the stone. In the empty square, two street sweepers collected tricolor confetti while wondering if the new pope would change anything in their lives. One of them looked up, saw the silent balcony, and spat on the ground. Those at the top always change the robes, but not the bread of the poor. The other shrugged. Maybe we should burn more than just papers. From his study window, Sixtus VI observed the same confetti, now tinged pink by the dawn. He remembered the note Petrus Romanus and thought that, if it was to be the final stone, he would throw it at the stained glass windows before letting the wolves rule the flock. And with that thought, he let the morning in, ready to rule among the embers and ashes, because he knew, like anyone who has seen their church burn, that only from ruins do temples rise where the shadows find no hiding place.